Have you ever stopped to think about what would happen if, in the middle of the Wild West where the line between life and death is thin, a cowboy fell in love with the daughter of a native chief? And what's even more incredible, she, the daughter of a tribal leader, would be everything he was taught to see as an enemy. Sounds crazy, right? But what no one could predict, not even the most experienced cowboy, is that this forbidden love would forever change the fate of both. Now, imagine the scene. Jack Sullivan, a fearless and solitary man, known throughout the region for his courage and skill with a gun, finds himself facing something much bigger than any battle. An unlikely encounter. He, who had faced the vastness of the desert without fear, now stands before a woman, Ayana Wiyaya, the daughter of the powerful native chief, a young woman with eyes full of wisdom and a heart that carries the weight of her culture. The first time their gazes meet, the tension is palpable. Ayana, with her strength and intelligence, knows the value of protecting her people, and Jack, with his bravery, understands that he must keep his distance. But something in that encounter, something indescribable, begins to change everything. What they don't yet know is that this simple glance will become the key to a love story that will defy fate and the rules of a world where survival is more important than any feeling. But what will Jack and Ayana discover together? Something neither of them could have imagined, something no cowboy or native chief could have ever predicted. Can you imagine the choice they would have to make? Because what happens next may surprise you in ways you never expected. Stay with me until the end of this video, because this story will take you to a place where courage and heart meet, where the unexpected becomes the greatest challenge of life. It's not just about an impossible passion, but about decisions that change destinies and that could change the way you see the Wild West forever. What you're about to discover will leave you speechless. But before continuing with this twist-filled story, I need to make an invitation. If you're enjoying this narrative and have been touched by this story of courage, love, and fate, I would love to know your opinion. Leave a comment sharing what you think about this unexpected connection between Jack and Ayana. Have you ever been in a similar situation in your life where loyalty was tested? Or maybe there's something in your heart that, like them, you never imagined could be possible. Share your feelings, your experience, because here, every comment is the exchange, and your voice matters just as much as the story we're telling. And of course, if this story has touched you so far, leave your like, because it helps the video reach more people who also love heart-touching stories. Your like is our way of knowing that you want more content like this. Every like is a sign that you're with us on this journey, and together we can make this story spread even further. Now, if you want to keep following this kind of content, if you connect with Wild West stories, with dilemmas of courage and love, subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you not only receive the stories directly in your feed, but also become part of this community, where stories like Jack and Ayana's become more than just narratives. They come to life. Your subscription helps keep the channel alive, full of content that aims to touch, teach, and entertain. And more than that, it inspires us to continue sharing the best of the Wild West and stories that change lives. Now, with all this in mind, let's continue this journey. What will Jack and Ayana do when fate places them before an impossible choice? Well, my friends, you'll find out next. Stay with me. The Wild West was not just a physical place. It was a battlefield where the souls of men and women were confronted by the forces of nature, tough choices, and often the weight of their own beliefs. Survival there was not a matter of luck, but of strength, cunning, and of course, the ability to make quick decisions in the face of uncertainty. Cowboys like Jack Sullivan spent their entire lives crossing the vast desert, facing dangers and, more than anything, protecting themselves from a world that was not made to show mercy. They were, by nature, fighters. Every step on the arid land of the West carried the weight of what could happen at every turn of the corner. As they entered an unknown town or crossed paths with another tribe, Jack had the hardened gaze of one shaped by years of battles and challenges. He was, in a way, a man forged by the fires of the West. But like every human being, something inside him longed for something more, and that's what made him even more real, closer to us. He wasn't just a cowboy with a gun at his waist. He was someone who, somewhere in his heart, knew that his life couldn't be measured solely by the number of victories in duels or hunts. Jack Sullivan carried on his shoulders the weight of loneliness and disconnection, the eternal search for a purpose greater than simply surviving. And at the most unexpected moment, that purpose led him to Ayana Wiyaya, a woman whose life was intertwined with the mission of protecting her land, her culture, and above all, the legacy of her people. Ayana grew up in a world where strength and wisdom intertwined. Daughter of the tribe's chief, she knew that the expectations on her life were immense, like the mountains surrounding her people. Her destiny was marked, but that didn't mean she didn't have doubts. She, like Jack, had her own internal struggle. Despite being a guardian of tradition, Ayana often found herself in moments of uncertainty, questioning the path her tribe was following, the role she herself should play in a cycle of resistance and protection. The strength she showed before her people didn't hide the fragility of her own inner struggles. Now imagine the clash between these two worlds, which until then seemed antagonistic. On one side, Jack Sullivan, the cowboy, a man used to dominating the land with courage and strength. On the other, Ayana Wiyaya, the daughter of the native chief who in her essence was the soul who defended not only her land, but the heritage of her ancestors. They were on opposite sides, with different histories and legacies, but as fate likes to play, this impossible meeting was about to happen, and with it everything would be rewritten. And this is precisely where the tension begins to take shape. Trust, which would be crucial between them, would not be easily earned. In the Wild West, every gesture, every word, every decision was a gamble. Jack and Ayana found themselves in a game where their loyalties, their beliefs, and their life stories intertwined, but at the same time clashed with the force of the past and the weight of their people's choices. In a world where distrust was the rule, where every movement could be the last, the idea of a cowboy and a native woman growing closer seemed unimaginable. And yet, with every exchanged glance, every word spoken in secret, something was breaking in the barrier between them. The tension was palpable, and as the improbable became possible, their fate began to take shape. What had seemed like a mere crossing of paths was now taking a different direction. Both were about to discover that the choices made in the heat of the moment not only affect their lives, but can define the future of everything around them. And more importantly, their journey was about to be tested in ways that even the most experienced cowboy could not have foreseen. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject because what comes next is a revelation that changes everything. Jack and Ayana's journey is not just about love. It's about how, often, our biggest decisions arise in the most unexpected moments, when we are confronted with who we really are and what truly matters. The impact of these choices reverberates not only in our lives, but also in the fate of a people, in the direction a story takes. But before continuing, I want to know, have you ever been in a situation where the choices seemed too hard, where you found yourself at a crossroads between what is right and what your heart was saying? Leave a comment. This makes sense to me, and share a little of your experience. Let's continue this journey because what's coming next will reveal some hidden truths about what really drives fate. Jack Sullivan had always been a man of indomitable courage. In the arid lands of the West, where life was worth less than a well-aimed shot, he was a legend. Known for his skill with pistols and his ability to escape situations where many wouldn't survive, Jack was the kind of man who seemed to fear nothing, or at least that's what everyone thought. The truth, however, was much deeper than anyone could see, because deep down, behind all his bravery, he carried a loneliness so profound that no triumph, no achievement could fill it. Those who saw him as an unbeatable figure, an immortal cowboy, never imagined that Jack was seeking something that went beyond the lands he crossed. He wanted more than just the honor of being the best gunslinger. His heart longed for something that couldn't be captured with bullets or victories in battles. What Jack wanted, what he felt was missing in his life, was a true purpose. Something that made him feel whole. Something that wasn't just the echo of his actions in the desert. He wanted to be understood, to have someone by his side who saw more in him than the man feared or admired for his feats. And perhaps, no matter how difficult it was to admit, he desired a love that was his, something that went beyond the pain and loneliness that had followed him for so long. Jack had never allowed himself to imagine a love that was possible in those times of constant conflict, where trust was a luxury. The desire to have someone by his side seemed like a distant illusion. The West was not a place for love stories, not when danger lurked around every corner, not when the next gunfight could be the last. Love, to him, had always been a weakness, a distraction that could ruin everything. But at that moment, when his eyes met Ayana's, all of that began to change. A subtle yet powerful change. The kind of change you don't expect, but that, at the same time, takes over you completely. Jack's resolve was being tested by something he never thought possible, a connection with someone who, in the eyes of the world, represented everything he should fear. Ayana Yaya, the daughter of the native chief, was the antithesis of everything he knew. She was a symbol of resistance, strength, and wisdom, but also of a deep humanity that touched the very core of Jack. What began as a simple exchange of glances between them transformed into something far more complex, something that challenged the laws of the West, and more importantly, the laws of what Jack believed was possible for his life. But at the same time, the idea of surrendering to this new and unexpected connection carried a great risk. Jack knew that their love would be an affront to many, especially to the native tribes and the other cowboys he knew. Ayana represented everything he was taught to avoid, everything he was taught to see as the enemy. Still, deep down, something inside him told him this wouldn't just be another battle to win with weapons and strength. It was a different journey, a journey where the greatest challenge would be facing his own soul and the beliefs that had defined him until that moment. It's hard for someone like Jack, who spent his entire life defending himself from the world, to allow himself to be vulnerable. Vulnerability seemed like a luxury in a place where survival was about standing firm, without showing weakness. Yet, with Ayana, he felt that weakness turning into something powerful. Maybe because, unlike the battles he had faced until then, with her, he would have to fight something much more difficult. The fear of surrendering, of trusting another person, of allowing love to be his greatest strength. But was Jack ready for this transformation? To face head-on the hidden truth within himself? The truth that, despite his skill and courage, he also needed something beyond the loneliness of his soul? The impact of this decision, of allowing himself to feel, would not only be a change for him, but for the very course of history, for Ayana's destiny, and for everything they both believed to be true about the world they lived in. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what comes next is crucial to understanding what's really at stake. It's not just about courage or love, but about how a single decision can transform not only a life, but the entire journey of a man. Jack didn't know it, but he was about to be challenged in a way he never imagined. The real fight was about to begin, but not with guns and knives, rather with something far more powerful, the transformation of his own soul. Ayana Yaya was not just the daughter of the native chief. She was the living embodiment of the strength and wisdom that sustained her tribe. From a very young age, Ayana learned the importance of maintaining peace between her people and the cowboys who constantly invaded their lands. Her name, Yai, which means spirit of the eagle, was not only a tribute to her ancestry, but also a metaphor for the role she played, a guardian of her people's vision and wisdom. She was the bridge between the ancient ways of her ancestors and the threats of the present. With her penetrating eyes and serene posture, Ayana was respected and admired by everyone around her. But behind this calm appearance was a restless mind, a heart that, although strong, also carried the weight of many unanswered questions. The responsibility of being the chief's daughter didn't allow her to choose her own destiny. Every decision she made had repercussions far beyond her own life. They affected the survival of her tribe, the future of her culture, and even the fragile balance between native people and cowboys. But what no one knew was that Ayana had her own doubts. She silently questioned whether she was truly on the right path. Being the leader her tribe needed made her carry an immense burden. But in moments of solitude, she found herself wishing for something more, something that wasn't a life of constant resistance. She felt the absence of something deep, a freedom that could not be found in the obligations of her role. While everyone around her saw her as an unshakable figure of strength, Ayana also carried her own fears and insecurities. She knew that the mission of her life was to keep her people united. But sometimes, she wondered if that meant losing her own identity, if it meant living forever in the shadow of a destiny she didn't choose, but had accepted as inevitable. And it was in this whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that Ayana, in a way she couldn't explain, found herself drawn to someone who, until then, seemed unimaginable. Jack Sullivan. When he appeared in her life, she didn't just see a cowboy with a revolver at his waist. Ayana saw a man who, just like her, carried the weight of his own loneliness. He, who was so relentless and fearless, seemed to have something she never imagined, a vulnerability, a need for something more than just battles and victories. At first, the idea of getting close to a cowboy seemed absurd. It was a risk, a betrayal of her tribe's values. Jack represented everything she had been taught to distrust, everything she had been taught to fear. But what attracted her to him was not just the fact that he was a man of courage. It was the way he saw himself, the way he viewed the world, in a way that challenged her to think, to question what she had always believed to be absolute truth. Ayana knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew that the cost of getting involved with him might be higher than she could bear. But something inside her, a quiet and strong flame, told her that maybe, just maybe, this path would bring the freedom she had long sought. Maybe Jack wasn't a threat, but the key to a transformation she never imagined was possible. Still, there was a great dilemma within her. Ayana wondered, could she follow her heart, even if it meant challenging the very values that had sustained her? The fate of her tribe was in her hands, and a mistake could mean the destruction of everything her father and ancestors had built. But at the same time, what she didn't know was that by following her heart, Ayana might not only change her own life, but also the story of everyone around her. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because Ayana and Jack's journey is, in fact, the journey of all of us at some point in our lives. The choice between responsibility and the desire for something more. What happens when we are challenged to question everything we've always believed to be right, to descend into our own inner abysses, to confront the unspoken truths we often try to ignore? What Ayana and Jack were about to discover together was not just a matter of love, but a matter of how the choices we make, no matter how painful, have the power to transform not only our lives, but also the fate of many around us. The first meeting between Jack and Ayana was nothing like those we see in epic love stories. There was no soft music playing in the background or a perfect setting. In fact, what happened was much more intense and at the same time, more complicated. They met in disputed territory, a land marked by centuries of conflict, where every piece of land had a deep meaning for both of them, but at the same time represented something to be defended with everything they had. It was the kind of place where you know any movement can be interpreted in different ways, depending on who makes it. And that day the tension was at its peak. Jack, with his penetrating eyes, always ready to analyze any risk, found Ayana in the middle of that desolate landscape, a setting that seemed like the perfect backdrop for the collision of two worlds. When their gazes met, it was as if time had slowed down, as if the universe, for a moment, paused to witness what was happening between them. There were no words, none were needed. Jack's gaze, marked by the distrust he harbored for anything or anyone related to the natives, met Ayana's, which carried all the wisdom of a leader and, at the same time, the weight of being the link between a past of resistance and an uncertain future. Both were at war, but it was a silent war, a war fought within themselves. They knew nothing about this was easy. They couldn't trust each other. Each of them had deep reasons to see the other as a threat. Jack saw in Ayana a representative of everything he fought against, and she, in turn, saw in him the embodiment of the enemy her people had always had to face. The tension between them was palpable, an invisible yet immense barrier that seemed to make them incapable of taking the next step without breaking something essential inside of themselves. But at the same time, there was something inexplicable, something that went beyond distrust, something beginning to form between them, like an invisible, extremely thin but incredibly strong thread. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're faced with something greater than yourself, something you can't control, but that starts to grow on its own, something that could transform everything. Jack's gaze wasn't just filled with distrust, it also contained curiosity, and Ayana's gaze, which seemed to be one of judgment, was laden with something more. There, in that moment, was a silent acknowledgement, as if, in some way, they both knew that what they were feeling was dangerous, but also something they couldn't ignore. They were somehow connected, even without fully understanding why. Could this meeting, which began with so much conflict, evolve into something greater, deeper, and perhaps more transformative than either of them would admit? Something that transcended the limits of what they knew, something that could change their own lives and even the destinies of their people? Or would this just be another chapter of distrust, of confrontation, of an ancient hatred that would never allow the truth between them to be revealed? Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject because what seemed like a simple meeting, a mere exchange of glances, was about to be tested in ways neither of them could ever imagine. They were on the verge of discovering the impact of their own decisions. That initial distrust, that palpable tension, could be the starting point for something much greater, a journey that could change not only their lives but also the course of everything they had known up until that point. And more than that, this inexplicable connection, beginning to grow between them, could be the key to understanding what really matters in life. The choices we make when faced with the unknown, with the impossible. Jack and Ayanna were on the brink of something much bigger than either of them could comprehend at that moment. They knew their worlds were completely distinct, that their peoples had been at war for generations, and that any misstep could mean not only their ruin but also the end of everything they had known. Each carried with them a heavy baggage of resentment and wounds, stories of battles fought and lives lost, shaped by violence and distrust. Jack, with his past of constant confrontations, was used to seeing natives as enemies, obstacles to be overcome, and on the other hand, Ayanna was no different. She was raised to believe cowboys were invaders, those who destroyed everything she and her tribe fought to protect. But despite all of this, something was beginning to grow between them, an impossible, dangerous attraction, like a fire igniting in the middle of a storm, something that, although they knew it could be destructive, also brought with it the promise of transformation. It was a connection that could not be ignored, could not be erased with the simple weight of the expectations of their peoples or the shadows of past wars. It was the kind of attraction that went beyond the physical, that defied all logic, all explanation. Jack and Ayanna were seeing each other in a way that challenged everything they had learned about each other. They were no longer just symbols of their cultures, but two human beings with feelings that transcended the boundaries created by history. However, as with any story of the Wild West, reality was not kind. What they were feeling could not be expressed without consequences. Both knew that, by involving themselves with each other, they would be challenging everything the world around them considered right. The trust between them, if it could even be called that, was a thin line, about to snap at any moment. With each step closer they took toward each other, the shadow of distrust grew darker, more threatening. Yet the desire to understand what was going on inside themselves, the desire to live something more than mere survival, pulled them closer. The tension between Jack and Ayanna wasn't just external, with the watchful eyes of their tribes and allies. It was internal, a silent battle they fought within their own souls. Could they overcome the barriers of distrust that had been built over generations? Could their feelings exist in a world where every act of vulnerability seemed like a fatal mistake? Both found themselves at a crossroads, with difficult choices ahead, and the question that kept repeating in their minds was whether they would be able to surrender to what they were feeling, or if the harshness of the world around them would smother them before they could discover what truly existed between them. The truth is that neither Jack nor Ayanna knew what the impact of their decisions would be. They were at the mercy of fate, and each step forward could mean the destruction of what they had built or the chance to rewrite their stories. What seemed right, following the expectations of their people, staying loyal to everything they knew, could, in fact, be the greatest prison they could build for themselves. But what did it mean to follow their hearts? What would happen if they set aside what defined them as individuals and allowed themselves to live a story that made no sense to anyone else but seemed to be the only true one for them? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because Jack and Ayanna's dilemma is one that many of us face at some point in life. When we are confronted with what we truly want, with what our hearts desire, can we really challenge the expectations and external pressures to follow that path? Or in the end, do we become consumed by the unrelenting realities that surround us, by the choices that are made for us and not by us? The impact of following Jack and Ayanna's hearts may be something far more transformative than it appears at first. They don't know it yet, but the true battle they will have to face won't be against an external enemy, but against the invisible chains that imprison them, the chains of history, loyalty, and fear. As the days passed, Jack and Diana began to realize something that at first seemed impossible. Despite the differences that separated them, there existed a connection between them that went far beyond cultural barriers, distrust, and the stories of hatred that had been imposed over the years. That initial tension, which could have been the end of any relationship, slowly transformed into something deeper, more human, and that was when the true transformation began, for both Jack and Diana. They were no longer just the cowboy and the native chief's daughter. They began to see something more in each other than the figures others expected them to be. They saw each other as souls who, despite their origins, carried the same weight of difficult choices, repressed feelings, insecurities, and desires for something more. It was as if, somehow, what united them the most was the silent understanding of what it meant to fight for what you believe in, to fight for what you love, even when the world around you is ready to crumble. Jack, who had always carried the weight of his own battles, realized that, in Diana, he not only found a reflection of his own loneliness, but also the strength he wished he had to face his own fears. And Diana, who had always known the importance of protecting her tribe, found in Jack something more than an enemy. She saw a man willing to risk everything, even his own pride, for something greater than himself. They were, unknowingly, building a solid foundation, an unlikely partnership that would challenge everything the Wild West represented. What started as a distrustful glance, a ground of tension and uncertainty, slowly transformed into something deeper and essential for both of them. In moments of danger, in situations of uncertainty when life seemed to be reduced to a series of impossible choices, it was in this connection that Jack and Diana began to rely on each other. And the most impressive thing is that, as trust solidified between them, what seemed like a strategic partnership became something much more intimate and genuine. They were no longer just allies in a war of resistance. They became accomplices, walking together on a journey that challenged everything they knew about love, loyalty, and survival. The challenges of the Wild West, with its constant confrontations and the pressure of a world at war, never relented. However, it was precisely in these moments of extreme vulnerability that Jack and Diana became more than just two individuals seeking their own paths. They became a true team, a unified force, capable of facing any obstacle, of questioning any norm that imprisoned them. Something that once seemed impossible was now inevitable. They had found each other, understood each other, and above all, respected each other. What's fascinating is that this connection was not immediate. It wasn't an instant change or a magical event that united them. It was a gradual process, unfolding. Over time, as if each conversation, each shared glance, each gesture of courage and loyalty brought them closer. What once was a glance filled with distrust slowly transformed into a silent yet powerful bond. They were beginning to recognize each other in a purer form, beyond the divisions the world forced them to have. This process of mutual understanding, of inner transformation, was what truly connected them. This journey of getting closer, of understanding each other beyond differences and prejudices, was far more than just a romance. It was a journey of healing, of reconstruction. Jack, who had lived only for the fight for so many years, found something in Diana that he didn't know he needed. The understanding that there are battles that cannot be won with strength, but with the truth that lives in the heart. Diana, in turn, discovered that not all battles were fought on the battlefield, and that true strength didn't just come from resistance, but from the ability to surrender to what the heart says. Now I want to dive even deeper into this subject because what Jack and Diana were experiencing is not just a love story. It is a lesson about courage and transformation, about how often the greatest battle we face is against ourselves, against the limits society imposes on us, and against the expectations that suffocate us. They were learning together that the greatest victories come when we allow ourselves to see beyond differences, when we open ourselves to what initially seems impossible. The connection Jack and Diana were building could no longer be ignored. What had started as a simple exchange of glances, filled with distrust, had transformed into something much bigger, a powerful and irreversible attraction, a complicity that united them in a way that defied the very laws of the Wild West. But as in all great stories of the West, happiness never comes without a price. They knew that by following their hearts, they were stepping into a minefield, where every step could mean the destruction of everything they had known. The decision before them was not an easy one. Jack, with all his courage and hardness, knew there was something in Ayana's heart he never expected to find, something that could not be erased, something that challenged him to rethink his beliefs, his loyalty, even his own life. He was faced with a dilemma: follow this impossible love, challenge everything his people considered right, or simply give up and continue living in the solitude that had always been his comfort zone. But there was a fire inside him, a flame that could no longer be ignored. He knew that if he let this opportunity pass, he would never have the chance to live something so genuine and transformative. Ayana, on the other hand, wasn't in a different situation. She had always known her destiny was set, that her responsibility to her tribe was non-negotiable. But looking at Jack, feeling the intensity of what was beginning to blossom between them, she found herself faced with an impossible choice. Follow the path her tribe expected of her, maintain loyalty to her land and people, or surrender to something that could be the only chance to live a life where love would be the force that moved her. The weight of her decision was overwhelming, because she knew that whatever her choice, it would have repercussions not only on her own life, but on the destiny of everyone around her. What Jack and Ayana couldn't know was what would happen when the world around them found out the truth about what was happening. The Wild West was not a place for forbidden love. For the cowboys, Ayana represented everything they fought against, and for the natives, Jack was a symbol of everything that was being destroyed by them. When Ayana's tribe and Jack's cowboys learned about this unimaginable romance, chaos would be inevitable. What seemed like a love with the power to heal deep wounds could turn into a fire that would burn everything they had fought to protect. But as always in the Wild West, nothing is simple. Jack knew that loyalty to his companions could be tested, and Ayana feared that her own tribe would reject her, considering her actions an irreparable betrayal. The truth they were trying to hide, the passion that consumed them, could be the force that, instead of uniting them, would tear them apart forever. The trust they were building couldn't survive the weight of the reality approaching, and, like any story in the Wild West, their future was at stake. Was what they were experiencing, this impossible attraction, worth facing the chaos that would follow? Could they overcome the barrier of prejudice, culture, and expectations to live what their hearts said was the truth? Or in the end, would they be forced to give up love in the name of survival? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because Jack and Ayana's decision teaches us something powerful. When we are faced with a love that challenges the expectations of the world, we are confronted with the truth of our own limitations, the fear of losing what we know, and the courage to follow what is, at its core, true. Their struggle isn't just about the choices they make, but about the impact those choices have on the lives of everyone around them. Jack and Ayana's decision was, without a doubt, the most crucial moment of their lives. When the weight of the choices finally came down on them, they knew there was no turning back. What seemed like the end of everything they had known surprisingly transformed into a new beginning. But as in all great Wild West stories, this beginning didn't come without its consequences. Everything they had built, trust, forbidden love, the promise of a future together, was now at the mercy of the relentless world around them. Every step they took toward the unknown was a risk, a price they would have to pay. And what they didn't know was that the impact of their decisions would reverberate far beyond their own lives. They were about to discover that in the Wild West, the greatest victories are not always won by strength. Jack and Ayana's courage was tested to its limits. More than any battle fought with weapons or strategy, the real fight wasn't in their bodies but in their souls. They decided to follow their hearts, facing not only the chaos their union would bring, but also the fear of losing everything. After all, they knew that loves like theirs were unwelcome in a divided world where each tribe, each faction, fought for their own survival, where loyalty to one people meant betrayal to the other. But what they discovered was that, by surrendering to what they felt, they were challenging not just the laws of the West, but the laws of fate. The end of what seemed like an impossible love story wasn't what everyone expected. There was no bitter separation or immediate tragedy. On the contrary, when the decision was made, there was a sense of liberation, but also great uncertainty. They had followed their hearts, yes, but what did that mean for the future? The Wild West didn't forgive those who took risks. But at the same time, Jack and Ayana's courage to not submit to the norms of a world that wanted them separated forced them to grow in ways they had never imagined. As the days passed, the pressure on both of them increased. Ayana's tribe, with its watchful eyes, would soon realize what was happening. Jack's cowboys, always loyal to their leader, wouldn't take long to see what was at stake. Every movement, every word exchanged between them became even more dangerous. But what was most important is that deep down, Jack and Ayana knew the choice they made wasn't just about what would happen to them, but about the impact their courage would have on others. They were breaking barriers, and those barriers wouldn't be easily rebuilt. In the Wild West, choices aren't simple. There are no guarantees that everything will end well. Victories can be won by force, bravery, and strategy, but some of the greatest triumphs come from seemingly impossible decisions, from the courage to follow what we feel, even when everything around us says it's wrong. Jack and Ayana didn't know what the future held for them, but by choosing to fight for the love they had found, they were in some way facing the greatest battle of all, the battle against doubt, fear, and the limits imposed by the world. That decision was perhaps the greatest demonstration of courage they could have given. It wasn't just about resisting external adversities, but about believing that even in a world where the impossible was the norm, following the heart could be the key to transforming their very destiny. And what they discovered is that sometimes the greatest victory is not in conquering land or an enemy, but in conquering oneself, in allowing yourself to live the truth that pulses inside each of us. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because Jack and Ayana's story leads us to a powerful reflection. When we are confronted with choices that can change our lives forever, what holds us back from following what we truly feel? Is it doubt, the fear of the unknown, or the pressure of others' expectations? What are we truly willing to lose to live the life we know we deserve? The impact of their choices goes beyond them, and this is the power that we all can access when we decide to follow what is true for us. The story of Jack Sullivan and Ayana Wiyaya is not just about a cowboy and a native falling in love amid a backdrop of war and distrust. It's not just an impossible love story between two worlds colliding. What truly makes this story powerful and transformative is their courage to challenge what the world expected of them. In a place where survival depended on conforming to the rules and dividing the world into friends and enemies, Jack and Ayana chose to do something completely different: fight for what they believed was right, even if it meant facing rejection, betrayal, and even the destruction of everything they had known. The true essence of this story lies in the courage to believe in the power of love, even when all circumstances seemed to condemn it. Jack and Ayana were faced with a love that challenged them, not only because of the cultural and historical barriers that existed between them, but also because of the fears and insecurities they carried in their hearts. They didn't know what the future held for them, but they chose to face the unknown with courage, with open hearts and willing to accept the consequences of their decisions. And this, in a world like the Wild West, is no small feat. The Wild West was a place where strength, bravery, and respect were earned by the power of the sword or the revolver, where loyalty to one's own tribe and allies was the main currency. But Jack and Ayana, by choosing to follow what they felt, were choosing a much harder path, the path of vulnerability, uncertainty, and the possibility of losing everything they had fought for. The impact of their choices goes far beyond the simple fact of two individuals falling in love. They challenged a power structure that was considered impassable, not only between natives and cowboys, but between any group of people who over the years had become accustomed to seeing the other as the enemy. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they faced the unknown with a confidence that many in the Wild West never had the courage to possess. They believed that even in a world where distrust and hatred ruled, there was room for something more, something that transcended war and fear. Jack and Ayana's journey teaches us that often the greatest victories do not come from what we conquer by force, but from what we manage to preserve with courage. They were not heroes in the traditional sense. They didn't use their strength to defeat enemies or conquer land. They used something far more precious: the courage to follow their hearts and believe that in the end, love could overcome everything that separated them. And it is this message that makes their story so powerful. No matter where or when we live, the courage to follow what we believe is right, even against all odds, is what truly defines us. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this subject because Jack and Ayana's story is not just a lesson about the Wild West. It's a lesson about the choices we all face, about what we're willing to lose, and about how the power of love and courage can transform even the most impossible situations. They didn't know what the future had in store, but they were willing to find out. And no matter how unknown the path ahead was, they chose to live with open hearts, something that for many would be unthinkable. If you've made it to the end of this journey, it's because this story really touched something inside you, just as it touched me. And if this content made sense to you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here we're always sharing stories that go beyond the obvious, stories that make us reflect, inspire us to live with more courage, and believe in the power of transformation. If you feel that this message was for you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." I'd love to know that you followed all the way through and that, in some way, this story impacted you. Oh, and if you like this content, a like is also very welcome because it helps get this type of story out to more people who, just like you, are seeking something that makes sense and brings transformation. And if this journey isn't over for you yet, there's another story here on the side that will touch you. Click and continue with me there.